She was 19 and newly homeless, cast out from a boarding house in a Colorado mining town, with nothing to her name but the clothes she wore, a small wooden bird in her pocket, and $3 silver. With that trivial sum, she attended a tax auction in the half-abandoned settlement of Redemption Gulch and bought Lot 47, the town's burned-out opera house. It was a ruin nobody else wanted. But what nobody knew, least of all the men who thought their secrets had burned with it, was that hidden deep beneath the rotted orchestra pit was a truth that would change not just her life, but the future of the entire valley. Settle in with us for this story of quiet courage, and let us know where you're watching from tonight. Lucy Harper's life had been shaped by things left behind. She was born in a small eastern town to a mother who loved the color yellow and a father who could fix any clock, and for 9 years, her world was small and safe. Then, the influenza came through in the winter of '71, and it took them both within a week of each other. She was sent west on a train to live with her mother's sister and her husband, a couple who accepted her with the grim resignation of familial duty. They saw a mouth to feed, not a child to raise. The only person who saw the girl herself was her maternal grandfather, Elias Vance. He was a cabinet maker, a man whose silence was as profound and comfortable as the deep woods he loved. His hands, gnarled and stained with shellac, were instruments of creation. He smelled of pine shavings, linseed oil, and patience. In his workshop, a place of sacred order and light, he taught Lucy the language of wood. He taught her to read the grain, to understand how a tree's life was written in its rings. He taught her the names of tools, the coping saw, the block plane, the chisel. He taught her that a strong joint was more important than a fancy carving, and that the integrity of a thing was determined by its hidden structure, not its surface gloss. He never spoke of love, but he showed it when he guided her small hand to hold a saw correctly, his large thumb resting over hers, steadying her. For her 10th birthday, he gave her a small robin he had whittled from a single piece of cherry wood, its surface burnished so smooth it felt warm and alive in her palm. It was the only gift she had ever received that was made just for her. When Elias died 2 years later, his workshop was sold, his tools scattered, and the last warmth in Lucy's life seemed to go with him. Her aunt and uncle, seeing an opportunity to unburden themselves, sent her away to a boarding house in the booming mining town of Argent Peak, arranging for her to work as a laundress to cover her keep. The whittled robin, tucked safely in the pocket of her dress, was all she took with her of the man who had taught her to see the strength in things. Life in Argent Peak was a lesson in anonymity. Lucy rose before dawn, her hands raw from lye soap and boiling water, and fell into her narrow cot after dark, the scent of steam and sweat clinging to her hair. She was a ghost in the house, a pair of working hands. Her aunt and uncle's monthly payments for her room and board were the only connection she had to them, a transaction that kept her housed but not wanted. Years passed in this rhythm of relentless, thankless labor. She learned to be self-reliant, to mend her own clothes, to expect nothing, to depend on no one. She saved what little she could, a few cents here and there, hiding the coins in a loose floorboard beneath her bed. She was 19 when the letter arrived. It was not addressed to her, but to Mrs. Gable, the severe, pinch-faced woman who owned the boarding house. Lucy was folding sheets in the laundry when the woman appeared in the doorway, the paper held between her thumb and forefinger, as if it were something soiled. Her uncle's latest mining speculation had failed, Mrs. Gable stated without preamble. The payments had stopped. The final one had been last month. Lucy had until morning to gather her things and leave. There was no pity in the woman's eyes, only the cold accounting of a landlady whose ledger had been balanced against her. Lucy did not argue. She did not plead or cry. The years of being treated as a line item in someone else's budget had prepared her for this. She simply nodded, her gaze steady. That night, she packed her few belongings into a small canvas satchel, a change of clothes, a bar of soap, a comb. From beneath the floorboard, she retrieved her savings, $3 silver and a handful of cents. She placed the coins in a small cloth pouch and put it in her pocket, where her fingers brushed against the smooth, familiar shape of the cherrywood robin. She was a line item that had just been erased. As the first pale light of dawn touched the grimy window of her room, Lucy Harper walked out of the boarding house and did not look back. She had her grandfather's bird, her own quiet competence, and $3 to her name. She was utterly alone, and for the first time, she was entirely her own. The air on the street was sharp with the promise of autumn, carrying the metallic tang of the mines and the scent of coal smoke from 100 breakfast stoves. Lucy stood for a moment, a small, still figure in the bustling morning of Argent Peak. Men with lunch pails and soot on their faces streamed past her, their faces set with the grim purpose of another day spent underground. No one noticed the girl with the canvas satchel and the lost look in her eyes. She had no destination. She walked until the town began to thin, the clapboard storefronts giving way to scattered cabins, and then to open country. She followed a wagon road that wound its way down from the high peaks, moving with no plan other than to put distance between herself and the life that had just ejected her. The sun rose higher, warming her shoulders through her thin shawl. The landscape was immense and indifferent, a panorama of granite mountains, dark pine forests, and a sky so vast and blue it felt like a weight. She walked for hours, her fatigue a dull ache that settled deep in her bones. By midday, she shared a piece of her bread with an old prospector leading a tired-looking mule. He was a man whose face was a roadmap of sun and disappointment, but his eyes were kind. He asked where she was headed. She told him she wasn't sure. "Not much left up here," he said, chewing slowly. "Mine's playing out. Folks are clearing out of these hills, but there's a tax auction down in Redemption Gulch tomorrow. County's selling off the leavings." He pointed with a gnarled finger down the valley. "Might find something cheap if you've a mind to settle." The name, Redemption Gulch, stuck with her. It sounded like a place that understood second chances, or perhaps a place that had given up on them entirely. She thanked the man and continued on, the idea taking root in the barren soil of her desperation. She spent the night in a farmer's barn, burrowed into the hay for warmth, the wooden robin clutched in her hand. The next day, she paid a man a few of her hard-saved cents to ride in the back of his wagon, and by late afternoon, she arrived in Redemption Gulch. The prospector had been right. The town was a ghost of whatever it had once been. A wide, dusty main street was lined with buildings whose windows were boarded up or broken, their false fronts leaning like tired old men. A handful of businesses remained, a general store, a saloon with one shutter hanging by a single hinge, a blacksmith's shop, and a small eatery with a trickle of smoke rising from its chimney. A notice was nailed to a post outside the land office. It listed properties to be sold for back taxes, mining claims long since played out, cabins collapsing into the earth, and at the very bottom of the list, marked with a kind of administrative sigh, was Lot 47. The Grand Palace Opera House. Arrears, $2.87. The auction took place the following morning on the steps of the land office. The town clerk, a man named Abernathy, with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, read from the list in a monotone voice that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. A small crowd of perhaps a dozen men had gathered, mostly locals with the weathered, watchful faces of those who had learned to endure rather than to prosper. They bid on a few of the small claims, their offers low and grudging. When Abernathy finally announced Lot 47, the old opera house, a quiet chuckle rippled through the group. "Starting bid, $5, he said, without much hope. Silence. The opera house was the town's most prominent failure, a monument to ambition that had literally gone up in smoke 5 years earlier. It was a blackened shell, a dangerous eyesore. $3? Abernathy tried. More silence. The men shifted their weight, looking at the ground. No one wanted the liability. From the back of the small crowd, a clear, calm voice said, $3. Every head turned. Lucy stood with her hand raised, her expression serious. The men stared, a mix of disbelief and amusement on their faces. The clerk peered over his spectacles. Surprised, "The girl bids $3, he announced, as if to confirm what he was seeing. "Do I hear 4? The only response was the wind whistling around the corner of the building. Going once. Going twice. He looked at Lucy, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Sold, to the young lady for $3. She stepped forward and counted out her entire fortune onto the clerk's worn wooden table. He wrote her a receipt and handed her the deed, a single sheet of paper that declared her the owner of a ruin. She folded it carefully and put it in her satchel. The men watched her go, some shaking their heads, one spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. As she walked toward the end of the street where the opera house stood, she could feel their skepticism like a physical force. The building was worse up close. It was a carcass. A fire had gutted its heart, leaving a skeleton of scorched brick and blackened timber. The ornate facade, once the pride of the town, was stained with soot, its grand arched windows vacant and gaping. A large section of the roof had collapsed entirely, exposing the interior to the sky. The main doors were gone, leaving a dark, inviting maw. She stepped over the threshold, her footsteps crunching on a floor of ash, shattered glass, and debris. The air was thick with the smell of old smoke and damp decay. Inside, it was a cavern of destruction. Charred beams lay in a tangled heap where the main seating area had been. The grand balcony, what was left of it, sagged at a perilous angle, its velvet railings burned away to skeletal iron. The stage itself was the epicenter of the damage. The floorboards were completely gone, leaving a gaping, rubble-filled hole that was the orchestra pit. It looked hopeless. But as Lucy stood there, in the center of the devastation, her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. "Look at the bones of it, girl." She looked past the rubble, past the ash. The foundation stones, visible in the pit, were massive blocks of granite, seemingly untouched by the fire. The surviving brick walls, thick and solid, rose 3 stories high. They were stained and damaged, but they were standing. There was strength here. Beneath the ruin, the structure was sound. She had not bought a pile of ash, she had bought the bones of a great and sturdy building. Lucy knew she could not assess the full extent of the damage or the potential for salvage on her own. She needed someone who spoke the language of structure, as her grandfather had. Someone who understood stress and load and the integrity of timber. In the general store, while buying a small bag of flour and some salt, she asked the proprietor about a carpenter. "Only one worth his salt left in these parts," the man said, weighing her flour. "Charles Shaw. Lives in the cabin by the creek. Keeps to himself mostly, since his wife passed." He gave her directions, his eyes lingering on her with a curiosity that was not unkind. She found the cabin easily enough. It was small but meticulously kept, with a neatly stacked woodpile and a garden patch that was clear of weeds even this late in the season. A man was sitting on the porch, sharpening a handsaw with a file. He was perhaps 40, with a lean, strong build and a quiet, self-contained air. His hair was graying at the temples, and his face was lined with a sorrow that had settled in for a long stay. This was Charles Shaw. Lucy approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up, his filing stopping mid-stroke. His eyes were a clear, startling blue. "Can I help you?" His voice was low and a little rough from disuse. She explained who she was and what she had done, the words coming out plain and direct. She told him she had bought the old opera house. He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. She confessed she had no money to pay for his time. Instead, she made him a proposition. "If you would walk through it with me, tell me what is sound and what is lost. You can have the salvage rights, any timber, Any scrap iron, anything of value you can reclaim from the wreckage is yours to keep." He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze searching. He saw not a foolish girl, but someone with a serious and practical mind. He saw the desperation, but also the resolve beneath it. It was an honest offer, a trade of knowledge for material. He wiped the file on his trousers, stood up, and slid the saw into a leather loop on his workbench. "All right," he said. "Let's have a look." They walked to the opera house together in silence. Inside, Charles moved with the slow, deliberate confidence of a man who understood buildings in his bones. He ran his hand over the brickwork, tapped on beams with the handle of his hammer, and squinted up at the skeletal roof. He confirmed her initial assessment. "Foundation's granite. Solid as the mountain it came from," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "These main walls are 3 bricks thick. They'll stand." He pointed upward with his hammer. "Balcony's a death trap. Has to come down. Roof is gone. Floor joists are mostly charcoal." He walked to the edge of the gaping orchestra pit, kicking a piece of rubble into the darkness. "The fire started here, looks like. Burned hottest in this spot. We'll need to clear this pit down to the foundation to see what we're really dealing with." He looked at her, his expression grim, but not dismissive. "It's a lifetime of work. More than a lifetime." "I have time," Lucy said quietly. He nodded slowly, a flicker of respect in his blue eyes. "The salvage is worth my time," he said, making the agreement official. "We'll start in the pit. Tomorrow at sunrise." He turned and left without another word, leaving Lucy alone in the gathering dusk, the new owner of a ruin and an alliance. The next morning, as the sun crested the eastern ridge, Charles was there, waiting. He had brought 2 sturdy shovels and a wheelbarrow. For the first time since she'd left Argent Peak, Lucy felt a flicker of something that was not dread, but purpose. The work was brutal. The orchestra pit was a choked maw of debris, charred timbers, heavy chunks of fallen plaster, twisted iron from gas lamps, and a deep, settled layer of sodden ash that had turned to a heavy, greasy mud. They worked in a grim rhythm, shoveling the wreckage into the wheelbarrow, which Charles would then haul outside and dump in a growing pile. The air was thick with the dust of plaster and the acrid smell of old fire. Lucy's muscles, accustomed to the repetitive motions of laundry work, screamed in protest at the new strain of lifting and hauling. Her hands, already calloused, soon blistered and bled. She wrapped them in strips of cloth torn from her spare dress and kept working. Charles worked beside her, his movements economical and powerful. He didn't offer sympathy, but he set a pace that was sustainable, and he showed her how to use her legs and back to lift, saving her arms. Days blurred into a week. They spoke little, their communication consisting of grunts of effort and short, practical phrases. "Watch that beam. More to the left." A silent partnership was forged in shared labor, in the sweat and dust of the pit. They slowly, painstakingly, cleared the hole. The massive granite foundation stones were revealed, solid and unyielding. As they reached the original dirt floor, Lucy's shovel struck something that made a dull, flat clank. It was not the sound of rock. "Hold on," Charles said. He knelt down, scraping away the last layer of dirt and ash with his hands. What emerged was a large, flat flagstone, about 3 feet square, distinct from the packed earth around it. Set flush into its surface was a recessed iron ring, rusted but solid. It was a trapdoor. They looked at each other, the same question in their eyes. With a shared heave, they gripped the ring and pulled. The stone was immensely heavy, but it lifted with a grating shriek of stone on stone, pivoting on hidden hinges. A wave of cool, dry, musty air washed over them, a smell not of decay, but of long enclosed stillness. Below was a set of steep stone steps leading down into absolute darkness. Charles retrieved a lantern from his tool bag, struck a match, and lit the wick. He held it over the opening. The light revealed a small, stone-walled cellar, no more than 10 feet square. It was dry and, astonishingly, untouched by the fire that had raged directly above it. And it was not empty. Against one wall were stacked several large, leather-bound costume trunks. Against another stood a small, elegant writing desk, with a chair neatly tucked beneath it. And in the center of the room sat 3 stout wooden crates, sealed with bands of iron. Charles descended the steps first, holding the lantern high. Lucy followed, her heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. He set the lantern on the desk. Its warm light pushed back the shadows, revealing a scene frozen in time. On the desk lay a thick ledger and a sealed envelope. The envelope was made of heavy vellum, and written across it in a graceful looping hand were the words, "To a finder with good hands." With trembling fingers, Lucy picked it up. It was addressed to her, or to someone like her. Someone who had come to this place not to destroy, but to build. Using the point of a nail Charles handed her, she carefully broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter within. The letter was written on 3 pages of thick, creamy paper. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was clear and strong. It began without salutation. "If you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and I am gone. But you have found my secret, and for that, I must trust you. My name is Adelaide Marcotte. I was the manager of this opera house and its principal soprano. I built this room myself, with the help of a stonemason who owed me a great debt and knew how to keep his silence. It was meant to be my sanctuary, a place to store my savings and my memories." Lucy read the words aloud, her voice soft in the still, underground air. Charles stood by the crates, listening, his face a mask of concentration. "This theater was my life," the letter continued, "but it became a cage. The men who financed its construction, Miss Sterling of the Consolidated Mine and Mr. Pruitt of the Town Bank, are not the benefactors they pretend to be. They are thieves. I discovered they were using a hidden compartment in the business office to hide money skimmed from the mine's payrolls, money stolen from the wages of their workers. When I confronted them, they laughed. Then they offered me a share. When I refused, they grew cold. I knew my time was limited. I began to move their ledgers, the proof of their crimes, down here to my cellar, along with my own life's savings. The money in the large trunk is mine, earned honestly over 20 years on the stage. It is clean. Use it. The money in the sealed crates belongs to the devil. It is one of the payrolls they stole. I do not know what you should do with it, but I know it does not belong to them." Lucy paused, her eyes scanning the last page. Her breath caught in her throat. They spoke of having an accident at the theater, a small fire to destroy the records in the office. "I do not believe it will be small. I believe they mean to destroy the entire building, and me with it. I have a daughter living with my sister in St. Louis. I have not seen her in 5 years. I have been saving to bring her here, to build a life for us away from all this. I fear I will never see her grow up. If you are a person of conscience, use what you find here to build a life of safety and peace. That is all I ever wanted. Do not let them win." Adelaide Marcotte, October 12, 1875. When Lucy finished reading, the silence in the cellar was profound. They now understood. The fire was no accident. It was murder and arson, and the men responsible were likely still powerful, still wealthy, still dangerous. Charles moved to one of the sealed crates, and using the claw of his hammer, pried at the iron band. It groaned, and then snapped. He lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of small canvas bags, each tied with string. He opened one and poured the contents into his palm. Gold coins glittered in the lantern light. A fortune. Lucy looked from the gold to the letter, then to the ledger on the desk. It was all here, the motive, the evidence, and the means to fight back. The money from Adelaide's trunk gave her something she hadn't had before. Capital. She turned to Charles, her mind clear and resolved. "The salvage rights I offered you were for an empty building," she said, her voice steady. "This changes things. I want to hire you, Mr. Shaw. I want you to help me rebuild this place. I will pay you a fair wage, starting today." Charles looked at her, then at the open crate of gold. He pushed the lid closed. "You don't need to hire me, Lucy," he said, using her first name for the first time. "Some things you do because they need doing. We'll rebuild it." Together, their first act was one of concealment. They carefully replaced the lid on the crate, moved the ledger and Adelaide's letter into the trunk with her savings, and lowered the heavy flagstone back into place, scattering dirt and debris over it to hide the seams. The secret was safe again, buried beneath their feet. The discovery had transformed Lucy's desperate gamble into a tangible mission. She was no longer just a homeless girl seeking shelter. She was the custodian of Adelaide Marcotte's legacy and the keeper of a dangerous truth. The money from Adelaide's trunk was her weapon and her shield. The next morning, she walked to the general store and, with a calm that startled the proprietor, purchased supplies, nails in every size, new blades for their saws, rope, heavy canvas tarps, and enough flour, beans, and bacon to last for weeks. The transaction, paid for with a few of Adelaide's silver dollars, sent a quiet ripple through the town. The girl with the ruin was not as destitute as they had assumed. The rebuilding began in earnest. Their first priority was security. With new lumber purchased from a mill down the valley, they framed and built a set of heavy, solid doors for the main entrance, fitting them with a sturdy lock. They boarded up the gaping ground floor windows, sealing the structure from the elements and from prying eyes. Inside, the work was immense. Charles, now a partner rather than a hired hand, became her teacher. He showed her how to clear the rubble methodically, how to assess which of the fallen timbers were merely scorched and could be planed down for reuse, and which were truly lost. He taught her how to lay out and frame a new subfloor over the orchestra pit, its joists resting securely on the granite foundation. Lucy was a quick study, her hands and mind already attuned to the logic of structure from her grandfather's long-ago lessons. She learned to measure twice and cut once, the clean bite of a sharp saw through wood, a deeply satisfying sound. As they worked, the community began to stir, its curiosity slowly turning to a quiet, watchful support. Mr. Abernathy, the town clerk, appeared one afternoon with a dusty roll of schematics under his arm. "Found these in the county archive," he said, a glint behind his spectacles. "Original architectural plans for the opera house. Thought you might have a use for them." He did not mention that he had spent 2 days searching for them after hearing about her supply purchases. The plans were a revelation, a map to what the building had been and could be again. A few days later, a woman named Maria Garcia, who ran the small eatery down the street, arrived at midday carrying a basket. "You can't work like this on an empty stomach," she said, her voice warm but firm. She left them a pot of hot stew, fresh bread, and 2 tin cups of coffee. It became a daily ritual, a silent offering of solidarity. Even Silas Blackwood, the taciturn blacksmith, contributed. He appeared one evening, his face smudged with soot, and offered to temper and sharpen their tools. "A good tool makes for good work," was all he said. But his disapproval of the mine owner, Miss Sterling, was a well-known town legend. Each contribution was a single plank laid in the construction of a new community, one built not on words, but on shared, practical acts of goodwill. The days grew shorter and colder as autumn deepened, and the race to enclose the building before the first snow became their primary focus. The roof was the greatest challenge. The original trusses were a complex web of timber, and replicating them with their limited resources seemed impossible. It was Charles who, after studying Abernathy's plans for a full evening, devised a simpler, stronger design for the main roof supports. They spent a week on the newly laid floor, measuring, cutting, and assembling the massive trusses from salvaged and new lumber. Hoisting them into place, 3 stories up, was a task far beyond the strength of 2 people. Charles spoke to Silas Blackwood. Maria Garcia spoke to the few remaining ranchers in the valley. A week later, on a crisp Saturday morning, A dozen men appeared at the opera house. They were farmers, a prospector, the blacksmith, the general store owner, the quiet, stubborn men who had stayed in Redemption Gulch when the prosperity left. There was no formal greeting. They simply looked at the massive trusses on the ground, looked at Charles, and nodded. "All right, Shaw," one of them said. "How do you want to do this?" The roof raising became a town event, with a system of ropes and pulleys devised by Charles and the combined strength of 14 men. The first truss was slowly, carefully hauled into place, a great wooden skeleton against the sky. A cheer went up from the small crowd of women and children who had gathered to watch. By dusk, all the main trusses were set, and the opera house had a new spine. In the weeks that followed, Lucy and Charles painstakingly laid the roof decking and covered it with tar paper. The building was finally sealed, a dark, cavernous but dry space, protected from the coming winter. Within this new sanctuary, Lucy began to build her home. She chose a series of small rooms in the back of the building, once the Star's dressing suite. With Charles's guidance, she framed new walls, insulated them with sawdust and scrap, and installed a small, efficient wood stove she bought from the blacksmith. She built a bed frame, a table, and a set of shelves. It was simple, sparse, but it was hers. Every nail she hammered was an act of reclamation. One evening, as the first snowflakes of the season drifted down outside, she lit a fire in the stove for the first time. She sat at her new table, eating a bowl of Maria's stew, and watched the flames dance behind the small iron door. The whittled robin from her grandfather sat on the mantelpiece she had built, a small, silent witness. People in town had stopped calling it the ruin. Now they called it Lucy's place. The name had a sound of permanence to it. She was no longer Lucy Harper, the homeless girl. She was Lucy of the Opera House. One afternoon, a fine carriage pulled by 2 black horses rattled down the main street and stopped before the building. A man in an expensive coat stepped out. He was older, with a florid face and cold, assessing eyes. Lucy knew him instantly from Adelaide's description. Mr. Sterling, owner of the Consolidated Mine. He walked around the building, his gaze taking in the new doors, the solid roof. He saw Lucy standing in the entrance, her sleeves rolled up, a smear of sawdust on her cheek. "I see you've been busy," he said, his voice smooth and condescending. "This is a great deal of work for a young woman. I'll make you a generous offer, $500, cash, for the deed." Lucy looked at him, her gaze unwavering. She thought of Adelaide, of the stolen payrolls, of the life that had been extinguished in this very spot. "It's not for sale," she said, her voice quiet but firm as granite. Sterling's smile tightened. "Everything is for sale, girl. Think it over." He climbed back into his carriage and was gone, leaving only the threat hanging in the cold air. But Lucy did not feel afraid. She was standing on her own property, in a building she was raising with her own hands, surrounded by a town that was quietly choosing her side. Winter settled over Redemption Gulch, blanketing the mountains and the quiet street in a deep, muffling silence. Inside the opera house, in the small, warm apartment she had built, Lucy was at peace. The great hall remained a work in progress, a vast, shadowy space filled with the clean scent of new pine and the lingering memory of ash. But her own rooms were a sanctuary of light and warmth. A fire crackled in the cast-iron stove, its heat pushing back the profound cold of the Colorado night. On the stove, a pot of soup simmered, a gift from Maria Garcia. The rituals of her new life were simple and satisfying. Mornings began with coffee shared with Charles before they started their day's work. Evenings ended here in the quiet of her own home, a home she had quite literally raised from the ashes. She sat at the small table Charles had helped her build from salvaged oak, the wood planed and sanded so smooth it felt like silk beneath her fingertips. On the mantelpiece above the stove, Two small objects sat side by side. One was the cherry-wood robin her grandfather, Elias Vance, had carved for her so many years ago. It had been her only link to a past where she was loved, a talisman of craft and care she had carried through years of loneliness. Next to it sat a small porcelain music box, its painted roses faded but intact. She had found it in Adelaide Marcotte's trunk, tucked amongst the folded silks and letters. When she wound the tiny key, it played a fragile, hopeful tune. The two objects, one from the quiet man who taught her the strength of wood, and one from the brave woman who had left her a legacy of defiance, seemed to hold a conversation in the flickering firelight. They were gifts from strangers who had seen value in the world, one in the grain of a tree, the other in the truth of a ledger. Lucy looked out her new window, a pane of real glass that had been a gift from Mr. Abernathy, who found it in a back room of the town hall. She could see the lights from the few occupied houses in town, small yellow squares of warmth in the immense snowy dark. Charles had stayed for supper, and now he was heading home, his lantern a small, swinging star moving down the street. He was no longer just a partner in work, he had become her friend, her anchor in this new life. She thought of her aunt and uncle, of Mrs. Gable, of Mr. Sterling. They had all looked at her and seen something to be used or discarded, a problem to be solved, a nuisance to be removed. They had cast her out with the administrative coldness of a bad debt being written off. But they had underestimated her. They hadn't known about the lessons of a cabinet maker, the resilience forged in a steam-filled laundry, or the courage she would find in a dead woman's letter. Lucy Harper had been 19 and homeless. She had $3 to her name, and she had spent it on a ruin that everyone else had abandoned. It was the best $3 she ever spent. It had not just bought her a building, it had bought her a foundation, a future, and a home. Thank you for joining us for this story of quiet resilience. If the tale of a home found in an unexpected place resonated with you, consider subscribing and sharing for more stories of courage and craft. We'll leave you with a question to carry with you. What is something you have built or repaired in your own life that meant more than just the materials you used to make it? Let us know in the comments below. We look forward to seeing you again next time.